Hello everyone. I'm going to create a series of videos on Spring concepts. In this video, I'm going to explain Spring dependency injection. I have written a small functionality. First, we will check that, and after that, I will explain how to convert the same functionality into dependency injection. Okay. I have written a controller class. It has a method getEmployees. It has a dependency on employee service. Okay. This method is going to call the getEmployees method from the employee service. Employee service as an interface, it has a method getEmployees, and this interface is implemented by two classes. One is Jdbc employee Jdbc IMPL, and another one is employee Hibernate IMPL. Both are implementing the interface employee service. In real time, these methods are going to retrieve the details from the database, but for our example, I'm simply displaying the message in the console. This is going to say that retrieving employees using Hibernate, and this implementation class is going to print message saying that retrieving so and so employees using Jdbc. So basically we have a controller which is going to call is getEmployees method from employee service. If you observe the dependency, we have not hard coded to any of the implementation class. We have given the type as interface. What is the advantage? The advantage of declaring as interface is at runtime you can either send the object of employee Hibernate IMPL or employee Jdbc IMPL. That is the main reason we are using interface rather than implementation class. Okay, you know, right? Already I have explained this has a method called getEmployees. It is going to call the getEmployees method from the corresponding implementation object which is going to be provided at runtime. You can either pass Hibernate implementation class or Jdbc implementation class. Okay, we will see now without Spring how we are going to instantiate the employee controller and call the getEmployees method from the employee controller. So after seeing this code, everyone you can understand what we are going to do in client. First, we are going to create an object for the employee controller. Since it has a dependency on employee service, we have to call the setter method, right? Set employee service. We have to call the setter method to set the dependency that can be either employee Jdbc IMPL or Hibernate IMPL, anything we can pass. But we have to pass this dependency. So first we have to create the employee controller object. Then we are going to call the setter method, right? This setter method is going to simply set the implementation which you are going to pass at runtime to the variable called enp and we also have a primitive type employee count, and this to set this value we are going to call the corresponding setter method, right? So in a traditional way without Spring, to call the method from the getEmployees, we have to first create the controller, and then since we have the dependency on employee service, we are going to call the corresponding setter method, and we have to initialize the employee count value. For that also we are going to call the method set employee count. All these things of creation we are going to do it manually, right? So either you can send in the runtime or you can declare here, like since this has the dependency of employee service, I'm just making object of employee Jdbc IMPL. Okay. First, I am hard coding it to employee Jdbc IMPL. Okay, this is the dependency. So let us run this example. Forget about these two lines. These are Spring related, and we will check these two lines afterwards. This is what I told you earlier. First, we need to create the controller, and this has a dependency, right? The dependency we have already initialized with JDBC implementation. So this dependency we have created it manually, right? And we have set this employee count using the setter method in the client code. Okay. Since we have assigned employee JDBC IMPL, so whenever you make a call to the getEmployees method, it checks the object passed. What is the object passed to the interface declaration? JDBC IMPL. So it is going to call the getEmployees method from the JDBC IMPL. So we are going to get output as retrieving number of so and so employees using JDBC. Let us test whether we are getting that output. Right click, run as Java application. Okay, you got the output as retrieving 10 employees using JDBC. Suppose if you want to switch the implementation from Jdbc to Hibernate, what we have to do? We have to change the dependency manually here. Okay, employee instead of Jdbc IMPL, I am going to import the dependency. Okay, since this is the interface, you can pass any class which implements the employee service. Earlier we have passed the employee Jdbc IMPL. Now we thought of switching back to Hibernate IMPL. Then what we have to do? We have to create the object for Hibernate IMPL and assign that. Okay, now we will run this. Check the previous, you got output as using Jdbc from this get employees method. Now we will run this and check whether we are going to get the output from the Hibernate implementation class. Right click, run as Java application. Can you see? Now we got the output from which one? This Hibernate IML. Okay, so if you observe in traditional non-Spring way, we are creating the dependency and assigning it. Okay, right? We have created the employee controller with new in the client code. That is one object we have created, and the dependency also we are manually creating, right? And whenever we want to switch from one implementation to another, what we are doing, we are changing the code again and again in the employee controller. In Spring, all this is going to be taken care by Spring container. Okay, using the concept called dependency injection. Dependency injection is one of the types of IOC. What is IOC? Inversion of control. What exactly is inversion of controller? Instead of you creating the employee controller and the necessary dependency, the Spring is going to take care of that. Okay, for that what you need to tell the Spring? You need to tell the Spring what is the class that you need to create object for, and what is the dependency in that class. Okay, in our example, employee service, tell to Spring container. See, in inversion of control, what we are doing is instead of we creating the objects, you are going to take the help of Spring container for creating the objects, and not only creating objects, it will check using the configuration that if there is any dependency, and also that object will be created and that will be assigned using either setter injection or dependency injection, constructor injection. In this example, I have explained using setter injection. That means Spring is going to create the employee controller object, and by seeing the configuration, I'm going to explain the configuration in few minutes. Using that configuration, it understands that it has a dependency on employee service. So it not only creates employee controller object, it is going to create the employee service object and assign that service to the employee controller using the setter method, which is provided in the employee controller. Okay, we have the setter method, right? Setter method. So Spring is going to call internally this. This is called setter injection because it is calling the setter method to assign the dependency. There are two types. One is constructor injection and the setter injection. We are explaining. I'm explaining the setter injection. Okay, so how to tell about the classes and the dependencies to Spring? The basic thing. So whenever you want to create a object, what you will do in Java, suppose if it is student, you will simply say student st is equal to new student. Okay, if you want to create an object for that, first provide the information of that class to Spring using bean tag. Okay, for that there are two things. First you need to mention the id for that and class. Suppose if I want to create the object of employee JDBC IMPL, first I need to tell to Spring container about this class using class attribute. So provide the full name, full package name, and ID can be anything you can provide you wish. Okay. And if you want to create an object of Hibernate implementation, what we are going to do? Bean with ID of anything and class as the employee Hibernate team. Suppose if you want to create the object in traditional way, you call the new operator and say new employee JDBC IMPL or new employee Hibernate IMPL, right? Suppose if you want to create this object in Spring, forget about this. I'm going to explain in few minutes. Suppose if you want to create Hibernate IMPL in Spring, simply I'm commenting, removing these two lines which are not required right now. This is the traditional way. First thing you have to do is you have to create the Spring container. Okay, how to create the Spring container? By reading this config.xml, this class path XML application context. This is called the Spring container. Okay, there are different types of application context. Okay, so this application, in this we are using class path XML application context. This is going to read the configuration data provided in the config.xml. Okay, so it creates the Spring container. Whenever you want to create an in object in Spring, first I'm going to comment these two lines as well. Okay, let me comment this. We will see the basic thing. Whenever you want to create object in traditional way, you are going to use new operator, but in Spring, simply ask the container by providing the id which you provided in the config.xml. Say if you want to create an object employee Hibernate IMPL emp IMPL is equal to, in traditional way you will say employee Hibernate IMPL, right? No, no, not required. Simply say context dot get bean of what is the ID you mentioned here for the Hibernate IMPL EMP HIB service. So okay, provide the ID here. Okay, you need to typecast that. You import this corresponding thing. The return type will be object, typecast it to the corresponding class. So you are not using new operator. You are calling Spring to get the object. Run this example. Okay, just print out no error system dot emp just to see that object is created or not. So object is created. So you understand, right? Instead of using new operator, just mention the ID of the class for which you are going to create the object. Okay, those details you need to mention, otherwise Spring won't understand which object it needs to create whenever you use the ID in the context.getBean method. So simply say class and give any ID. It should be unique in the XML. So if you want to create object for this, ask Spring container with this ID and it is going to create object for this. Okay, so this is the simple object creation. Now if you see the employee controller, here it has two dependencies. One is primitive type employee count and another one is employee service, right? Let us go to employee controller. If you see, not only creating this object, it also requires the dependency like employee service, and it has a variable called employee count which we need to initialize. So how to tell Spring that after creating this object, it also needs to assign this a dependency which is called injecting the dependency. How we are going to mention that this employee controller needs an instance of employee service? By using ref tag in the configuration. So this is Spring way of saying, hey Spring, after creating this employee controller, also create object of employee Jdbc service. Whenever you Spring sees this ref tag, it understands that this employee controller has a dependency on the service. Okay, by seeing ref, what is this ref value? This is the ID of the bean which we need in the controller. Okay, this it trying to match the bean which has the same name. So since you have given value as employee Jdbc service, it tries to find out the bean which has ID as emp Jdbc service. So first it creates the controller. After seeing the ref tag, see, property tag is for initializing either object or primitive types. Okay, for object type you need to mention ref instead of value. For the primitive type you just mention the variable name in the controller, and by simply saying value is equal to 10. You understand, right? So now how to get the object of employee controller in from the Spring? Earlier we have seen how to get the object of employee Jdbc IMPL, right? Just ask Spring container to give the object of employee controller. Whenever you want object from the Spring, simply pass this ID, and whenever it sees the ref tag, it not only creates the object, it also creates the object for this employee Jdbc IMPL. And how it will assign that object? It will assign this object to this employee controller using setter method in the employee controller. This, since after creating the object for this dependency, since Spring is going to use a setter method, this is called setter injection. The dependency is injected to the controller. The dependency is injected by the Spring controller through corresponding setter method. Okay, internally you won't see all this, but internally it is going to call this method with the dependency this Spring is creating and passing it. So since it is using setter method, it is called setter injection. In the next video we will see how to use the constructor injection. Okay, you understand, right? First, create the application context. Application context is nothing but container. So this container reads this configuration.xml, all the details like bean, what is the class, what is the dependency, and everything. So it understands. So whenever you need the object, simply give the ID of that bean. Okay. So we will comment out this. Now we will test the employee controller. Okay. I'm commenting this and I'm commenting this one. So ask the Spring container. Now don't hard code the dependency here. Spring is going to inject the dependency through setter method, right? So remove that hard coding. Okay, now ask Spring to provide an object of employee controller. It go to the config.xml, it checks the ID of this bean, so it understands that it needs to create the object for this class, and whenever it sees the property tags and if the property has a ref tag, it understands that it has a reference to another object, right? So it will create the, it goes to the bean which has id as empjd service, and it creates this object and injects this dependency using setter method. And the same thing here, whenever it sees the value, this 10 value will be assigned to employee count in the employee controller through setter method, which is set emp count. It will call these two setter methods. When ref is mentioned, it is going to create the dependency object and set that, and if it sees the value, it is going to call the setter method, and this value is going to be set here. So the difference is ref is for objects and value is for primitive types. Okay, now we run this. So after getting the employee controller object, we are simply calling the get employees, which get employees is called is basically depending on the dependency object which you mentioned here. Here you mentioned that at the runtime, the employee JDBC IMPL has to be assigned to this employee service reference. So let us run this. So using JDBC, simple one line, it created the employee controller. Also by seeing the ref tag, it understands that there is a dependency. It created that object and assigned that object to the employee controller through the setter method. Since it is injecting through setter method, it is called setter injection. Okay. If you want to switch the implementation from JDBC to Hibernate, what we need to do, we need not modify the code of employee controller. Simply change that in the configuration. That is the main advantage of Spring dependency injection. We are achieving loose coupling. Okay. If you are assigning the dependency or hard coding here, this is called tight coupling. You are tying the JDBC implementation or Hibernate implementation to the employee service in the controller. Now, using dependency injection, simply by changing the configuration, we can switch from one implementation to another. We need not hard code it anywhere. Simply go to configuration and change here the ref as EMP. So give this idea. Since we are want now the dependency of employee Hibernate object. Change this EMP Hibernate. Remember, this reference value should match any of the bean. Whatever the bean you are going to mention, Spring is going to create that and inject it to the corresponding property. Okay, now we will run the same example. Can you see? Simply by changing the ref tag, we are able to switch from one implementation to another implementation. This is called, this code is loosely coupled. the first example we have hard coded, that is why it is called tight coupling. This is the main advantage. Let us recap what is the inversion of control. Inversion of controller means instead of you creating the employee controller and manually assigning the dependencies, you are asking some external framework like Spring Container to create the object and to assign the dependencies. That means the responsibility is switched from developer to the external framework. Okay, that is why it is called inversion of controller. Inversion of controller can be control can be done in many ways. Spring uses dependency injection to achieve inversion of control. Okay, now this is the Maven project. If you observe, we have to see any Java framework we need springs, we need jars, right? All those jars, in this example I'm using Spring 5. Okay, just mention the properties in pom.xml. Okay, and uh, the Maven reduces lot of effort in searching the jars and adding to build path. Simply mention the dependencies in the dependency section. It is going to download. And can you see, I did not manually search the jar files and added here, all done by Maven. You just mention the dependency group id and artifact as Spring context. Whenever it checks this dependency, it is going to download all these six. And since you mentioned JUnit, it also downloaded the JUnit.jar. Okay, if you don't know how to create the Maven project, refer to any Maven tutorial. It is simple. If you want to create, just file, go to new and create the Maven project. Okay, check on create simple project, and group name will be the package name like com.jl. Artifact id is a Spring examples, and click finish. After that, you will see the src main Java. Here we need to create the Java files. Okay, any properties file or XML files you need to copy in the src main resources. Okay, if any error say like Java version, go to right click properties, and in the compiler choose the like the build path, choose the corresponding version. I have selected JDK 1.8 for Spring 1. JDK 1.8 is required for Spring 5, so I have chosen JDK 1.8. Okay, hope everyone understand. Please share your feedback so that I can improve if there is anything that needs to be improved. Thank you everyone. Thanks everyone. I am going to create the next videos on auto wiring, and in the coming videos I will explain in detail about the auto wiring. After that I will give small examples about JDBC and all those things. Okay, thank you.